Hello, hope you're doing well. Today I'm going to do some drawing from imagination. I've had a few people ask about how I go about doing those sort of things and maybe what to practice, and just sort of in general, just sort of do some demonstration. What I will say is, as always, this is a unrehearsed sort of ramble. Anything that I say isn't necessarily the only way to do anything. It's just how I go about doing things. So let's start. So it's for me, it's very much a confidence thing, drawing without a reference or from imagination. But it's also something I've been doing ever since I was small, ever since I was a child. I very rarely drew anything from a reference. Now, for the brief time that I was at college, because I did go to college to do art and fashion, but I didn't stick at it for very long. That's when I really began to sort of think about using references. And I'm sure when I was a kid, there was the odd time where I'd draw some animals from a picture or whatever. But it wasn't strictly like studying to get better or anything like that. So like I say, most of my childhood up to now, I've drawn from imagination. So for someone who is maybe new to that idea, maybe if you've been drawing for a while and you want to sort of experiment a little bit with seeing what it is you can do without the use of a reference or a guide, you've got to build up your confidence a little bit, and you've also got to let yourself off the hook, because 9 times out of 10 it doesn't really work out, or it doesn't reach certain expectations, let's say. I mean, a drawing is just a drawing at the end of the day, isn't it? So you don't necessarily have to put such pressure on such things. Although we all do it, I do it all the time. I'll stop drawing a whole scene of things just because I've messed up a nose or something like that, and it's silly, really. So I suppose my first piece of advice, let's say if you're new to drawing or you're new to drawing from imagination, is to stick to something simple. Now, I've talked before about shapes, but maybe just draw some squares to begin with. Fill up a few pages with squares, do squares at different angles. It's something that's very low risk. Change up the shapes. Maybe you don't have to do a whole page of squares. You could do a whole page of shapes, let's say, because that's a little bit more interesting. Not that much more interesting, but you know what I mean. And then maybe once you've done a page or two of that, because I feel like most people will be quite comfortable doing that, then maybe move on to 3D shapes. So your cubes, your cylinders. And if you are unsure about how these things should look, there's no harm in using a reference, especially in order to build up a visual library, which will sort of be my next port of call, but we'll get to that in a minute. So yeah, shapes, and then, these are things I've kind of talked about before, so I won't go into too much depth, but then pick some letters or symbols. Because these, writing is in terms of writing the alphabet or, certain symbols and numbers, it's all stuff that we had to learn in some degree or another. So I sort of see drawing as just the same kind of thing, if that makes sense. You know, learning how to write those symbols, you know, A, B, C, D, etc., etc. I'm sure you know the alphabet. And you can do that from imagination, essentially, without a reference. Most people can. So it's... And how did we get there? We just did it and did it and did it until it became part of our visual library. So I sort of see drawing from imagination, especially something that's complex, is a very long-winded version of that. You know, it's taking something a little bit more complex and you just draw it and draw it and draw it until you can replicate it in some fashion. I hope that makes sense. Like I say, this is unscripted, so I'm sort of just throwing thoughts out there without really much concern. So once you're used to doing things like shapes or symbols, it can be anything as long as it's simple, just to get you used to the idea of not using a reference or a guide. Then maybe push yourself a little bit to draw maybe some faces or an animal, and try not to be disheartened by what comes out. Now, sometimes you'll win, sometimes, it'll work out. And if there's something in particular that you're used to drawing with a reference, say if you're a portrait artist or a landscape artist, try and do one of those without using a reference. So for me, one of those kind of things was skulls. Now, a few years ago, I really wanted to build up my visual library, and I also wanted to get better at drawing faces, and skulls is a good way of doing that. Now, it's been a little while since I've drawn a skull, so it might not be the best skull, but essentially, like I say, it might not be the best skull because it's been a little while. And the thing about visual library, I think it always needs to be topped up. It's not necessarily like riding a bike, or the way that I go about it anyway. But we'll get close. So yeah, I decided to draw. Well, first I learned sort of the basic parts of a skull. Then I tried to simplify those sort of things into something that I could replicate a few times. Hopefully the camera's seeing this. Yeah. So yeah, I'd do a few studies, then just to get used to how a skull looked and the certain components of a skull. And then I challenged myself to draw 100 skulls. I think it was 100, might be 200 skulls in a week. Just small studies like this from a reference, and then challenged myself to draw 100 skulls without a reference. Then I went back to doing them with a reference, and then repeated the process for a couple of weeks. Now, for me, that's how I typically go about learning how to draw these things without a reference. Now, something else you can do, you can also deconstruct things into its basic shapes. You might see people, it's not something I've done in a long time, but say like the human form could be broken down into these sort of things. Like I say, it's been a little while since I've done it, but like that. So this helps sort of memorize certain poses, the proportions of the body, but it also is the next, potentially a next step from drawing shapes from imagination. Now, there'd be a few more steps maybe in there, actually learn the proportions of the body and such, but you could probably see how learning how to draw skulls in a three-dimensional space would then inform something like this. And if you wanted to get really serious about shapes, you'd look into perspective. But I won't touch on that too much, if at all, to be honest. I might do that in another video. But at the beginning, I wasn't really thinking about perspective when I was drawing 3D shapes. I kind of think it's best to sort of go in cold, not know anything, try it for a few pages, if not for a week, then learn a little bit about that subject while looking back at your past sketches, and you can learn things through your mistakes. You want to sort of study these things for long enough so you don't get into bad habits in terms of like the first step of just sort of drawing stuff. Like I say, a couple of pages, maybe a couple of days worth of pages, as in like a page or two a day. And then, like I say, sort of look more deeply into the subject. Now, these kind of things will build up your confidence. They'll build up your visual library. And I think, as I've said, you have to constantly top that up or you sort of forget things. Now, this skull isn't perfect by any means, but it's recognisable as a skull. I treat my drawings as being very simple. If you're going to do something a bit more complicated and more realistic, it would take a lot more work. For me, that's kind of okay. It's good enough as long as it's readable as whatever it is I'm trying to put across. Now, unfortunately, it's all a case of practice. It's all a case of doing it every day. There's not really an easy route to go down, but it is quite an enjoyable thing, and it's something that I'm going to be creating a routine, sort of like a weekly routine for people who want to build up their visual library. Now, it'll probably be ready for late August, September time, I'm hoping, and it's just going to be a simple checklist, if I can get my words out, along with some references, hopefully, if I can get enough sources in that respect. But yeah, it so a few years ago I would do a page of shapes, page 2 of drapes. So that can be things like cloths or curtains or clothing. Then I would do some gesture work. And then, which is kind of more relevant to what we're talking about now, although all these things will help build up a visual library, confidence with drawing, and make it easier to draw from imagination. Then I would do sort of like a visual library study, which would be a different theme every week, and then I would pick a different sort of so say like animals. If I did animals one week, I would do mammals on Monday, birds on Tuesday, yada yada yada. So so it'll be a different thing each day under the theme of the week. And then I would do 100 studies of any particular thing that I felt like I wasn't 100% sure on, or that I needed to refresh on. So I might do 100 skulls, I might do 100 hands, I might do 100 figures, 100 landscapes. Something that I'm hoping to get into a little bit more is potentially watercolour, so I might be doing something like that with those sort of things. And then maybe after that, if you've got the time, then you could maybe do a no reference study, or I call it a study, just sort of experiment, doodle. I mean, that's the other thing to sort of think about, is to have fun with it, like sort of relish in your mistakes if you make any. Go cartoony, go abstract, things like automatic drawing, so, you know, not really thinking about what's coming next, like that. You know, I mean, it's a scribble, but it gets you drawing, it gets, you know, it gets the ideas going. Something else you could look into is Notan. Now, I do plan to do a video on Notan, so that can be useful. You could do ink splatters. You could do anything that pushes your confidence a little bit and is experimental, because at the end of the day, you're only going to be as good as how far you're planning to experiment, I think, with these sort of things. And be prepared to make mistakes, or things that you might consider mistakes. I mean, I suppose that's what I really want to get across, is that there are no mistakes. It's just how you perceive what it is that you do, and you're always going to be your harshest critic. I know I certainly am. So yeah, I think I might do another one of these videos next week, which is more of a long form drawing video, where I actually maybe draw some things from imagination, a little bit more in depth, like I say, more of a drawing video. But I wanted to sort of put across some of my thoughts, and to hopefully give you the confidence to pick up a pen or a pencil and just doodle, because it's kind of the funnest thing. It certainly is for me. I don't really relish drawing things from references too much. I think it's a different kind of pressure that you're putting on yourself, because you're trying to replicate something. As drawing from imagination, like I say, you can go as simple as shapes. You can aim towards something that's a bit more realistic. You could turn things into shapes themselves, like the human figure, and experiment with that, move those around. Or you could just sort of do a continuous line, or a automatic drawing type thing, just put marks on a page and see what comes out. But whatever it is that you do, I would like to see it. So if you do try out some doodling and you're prepared to share it with the world, like I say, I'd like to see it. Go and find me on Instagram and send me a link. Yeah, but I suppose one last thought, that you don't have to share these things. Don't ever feel like you have to share everything that you do. Maybe have a little secret sketchbook just for you, where you experiment, where you draw, you know, a little something every day, just to build up that confidence. And then as you go through some sort of routine like this, or as long as you're trying to sort of push yourself and build up a visual library, if you are interested in drawing from imagination, these imaginative drawings will only get better through the hard work of study. So it's a long road, and It doesn't always work out even when you've put the work in, but when it does, it's very rewarding, and it's definitely worth doing. So, as I've said, next week be a similar sort of video, but I'll actually do some more drawing type things. And yeah, keep in store for these practice routine things that I'm going to be doing. Like I say, it's going to be at least a month or two before they start appearing, but they will be on my Patreon. I'll make sure they're free though, because I feel like I really want to help people who want to do this sort of thing. And yeah, as always, look after yourself, and thanks for watching. Toodaloo.